students, today we will be discussing the principles of good governance in Kautilya's Arthashastra. The objective behind today's discussion is to give you an understanding and insight into the concept of good governance and the implications of good governance in Kautilya's Arthashastra. For the convenience of understanding, I have divided the entire discussion into three broad segments. First, we would start with the concept of good governance. Then we would try to understand the implications of good governance. And thirdly, what are the principles of good governance found in Kautilya's Arthashastra? Now students, good governance is a very popular precept in contemporary times. In fact, the conceptualization is based on the precept that governance should be people friendly. The focus has shifted from government to governance, to delivery of services and fulfilling aspirations of the citizens. Now, this perspective of governance, is it something new and unique, or did we have good governance in ancient India? Let us find out. Now, Kautilya's Arthashastra is said to be one of the finest treatises on statecraft, administration, law and order, justice, Dand, international relations, and the entire book is considered to be a manual of statecraft for the Chakravartin, Chandragupta Maurya. In fact, Kautilya lived at a time when the country's security was threatened internally by maladministration and externally by the threat of the Greek invasion. In fact, there were threats from adjoining kingdoms too. In fact, it was this fear of anarchy that may have compelled Kautilya to compose Arthashastra to lay the foundation of a strong state and a strong provision for fundamental governance in the country. In fact, it not only contains ideas on good governance, but also applications of these ideas into implications and statecraft. What is good governance? Governance is defined as the process of decision making and the manner in which these decisions are implemented. Now, good governance implies a high level of organizational effectiveness and citizen responsiveness. In fact, good governance entails a citizen-friendly administrative system. Mark Bever calls it a government in progress. In fact, this is a new process of governing which is citizen-friendly. Let us come to the features of good governance. The first feature of good governance is participation, where people, citizens, should have a voice in decision making, either directly through legitimate intermediate institutions or indirectly through various mediums of participation. Nevertheless, students, people should have a say in decision making. Second principle of good governance is rule of law, which implies fairness, just administrative system, and the fact that everybody is bound by the same principles. There should be fairness and impartiality. Thirdly, refers to transparency. Transparency refers to free flow of information. Processes, institutions and information are directly accessible to those concerned. Enough data is provided to others to monitor the process of functioning of the government. There should be free and fair access to data. Responsiveness refers to institutions and processes should try to serve all the stakeholders. The next important feature is consensus orientation. We should understand that there would be conflicts in society, interests would conflict, but then a wise decision is one where the best interest of all the groups are amalgamated and a consensus is arrived at for all concerned. In fact, decisions should be fair to all. Equity, which refers to the fact that all men and women have opportunities to improve or maintain their well-being. Effectiveness and efficiency refers to the government processes, institutions should produce results which utilize or take into consideration the best interests of the society. Institutions should be effective in addressing the concerns of the citizens. There should be efficiency in implementing governmental policies. Accountability, decision makers in the government, the private sector, civil society should be accountable and answerable to the general public. Strategic vision. A country can develop only when the leadership has a strategic vision for the future. Leaders and the general public should have a broad and long-term perspective on good governance, human development, along with a sense of what is actually needed for the benefit of everyone living in the country. Now students, the agenda of governance, or rather good governance, is not an agenda of the 21st century. Rather, it has been in existence in the glorious days of the Indian past. We have seen that the Mahabharata also replicates examples of good governance. The Arthashastra too focuses on good governance and a citizen-friendly administrative system. Kautilya, the Prime Minister in Chandragupta's court, in his Arthashastra emphasized on a practically tested and theoretically developed conception of good governance at a time when the human race was still trying to understand and discover its roots. India proudly boasts itself of having a good governance system in her glorious past. It is thus imperative to understand how these principles had already been emphasized in the Arthashastra. We need to understand that the terminology of good governance principles that we have just seen may not be found exactly in the same manner in the Arthashastra, but the ideas, the underlying emphasis of good governance, which is citizen-friendly administration, welfare state, was focused in the Arthashastra. Let us look into the purpose of the state as envisaged in Kautilyan Arthashastra. There are three important aims which a ruler should address. Raksha. Raksha is protection of life and liberty of the citizens. Palana. Palana is referring to justice, law and order. Yogakshema, which refers to welfare of the people. Now, if you look into the three pivotal functions of the ruler, it is also found in contemporary times, where it is the duty of the state to safeguard the life, liberty and property of the citizens. Kautilya also emphasized on protection of the life, liberty and property of the citizens, and this was a part of Raj Dharma. The king, the leader with a strategic vision. The king or the Raja or the Swami is visualized as a Rajarshi, the one who possesses all the qualities of a good king and an accomplished sage. Kautilya discusses at length the qualities that a king should have, and it is exceptionally essential for the king to be a good leader. For instance, the Kautilya expected the king to be very energetic and a source of inspiration to the general public. He states that if the king is energetic, his subjects will be equally energetic. But if the king is lazy and slack and does not perform his functions, in fact the subjects will also be like that, and such a state will fall an easy prey to the enemies. Therefore, a king should always be energetic and should aim at the best vision for the state. The king was also the pivot of administration. In fact, the Kautilyan state, we are told, ensured freedom, happiness, prosperity and all-round development of all. While contemplating good governance, Arthashastra emphasizes that a king should surrender his individuality in the interest of others. The king is expected to behave in a righteous manner. Arthashastra states, in the happiness of the subjects lies the happiness of the king. In their welfare, his welfare. Whatever makes his subjects happy, he shall consider good. In fact, according to Kautilya, when people are impoverished, they become greedy. When they become greedy, they become dissatisfied, and when dissatisfied, they voluntarily go to the side of the enemy and destroy their own state, their own master. Therefore, no king should give room to the emergence of such issues, because then that would be the downfall of the kingdom and the empire. The next aspect of good governance entailed in the Arthashastra is limited powers of the king. The king is like the servant of the people, what we know today as constitutional slave. The leaders do not have unlimited powers. Similarly, king or the Raja also had limited powers. He was not an absolute arbitrary ruler. Good governance definitely demands limits and restraints of the government. Arthashastra thus calls the king to act in a very, very regulated manner. According to Kautilya, sovereignty can be practiced only with the cooperation of others, and all administrative measures should be undertaken after considerable deliberation. The ability of the king lies in persuading and motivating his council of ministers and coordinating as a true leader so that the decisions taken collectively are in the interest of all. He emphasizes the need of the rulers to be absolutely rightful and just. He warns that the king should not commit such acts which may result in popular fury, and if such happens, the people may revolt and the kingdom will be destroyed. Another important aspect of good governance is welfare state. The sphere of activity of the state extended to all aspects of life. In fact, it was believed that a welfare state was one which emphasizes on maintenance, protection, preservation, promotion of a social order. It is the duty of the king to provide for the common good. The term welfare refers to total government actions for the benefit of all. In ancient India, the king became an embodiment of the common good of all. King was an instrument to achieve welfare by promoting general human well-being through peace, order, prosperity, justice, and human dignity. A king is bound to ensure that dharma was preserved. Another important aspect of welfare state was different policies for the good of the people. In fact, it was believed that a kingdom can go in for sustained happiness when there was an elaborate mechanism for welfare provisions. Another important aspect of good governance was dand, or what we find in modern times, rule of law. Dand, or the use of Dand-niti in Kautilya, is justified on the ground that it was a safeguard for all man's worldly existence. The demand of good governance, according to Kautilya, calls for lawful application of dand to ensure that the complete happiness of the individual is preserved, because unlawful or vicious application of dand causes universal dissatisfaction, and non-application would actually lead to matsanaya. The implication is that the king is supposed to maintain the good of all, promote law and order, and ensure that nobody was outside the purview of the law. What was essentially important to understand is that the concept of Dand-niti encompassed the contemporary ideas of equality before law and equal protection of the laws. Governance was a moral endeavor. This was exceptionally well elaborated in the Arthashastra. People who govern has been advised to possess qualities of morality, righteousness, and follow the path of dharma. In fact, if there was dharma in society and state, it would ultimately result in sarva kalyan, leading to sarva loka sangraha, ultimately referring to sarva hiteha raha, which means the greatest good of the greatest number. In other words, governance was a moral endeavor based on dharma or righteousness. Next important aspect of good governance emphasized in the Arthashastra was a people-friendly administrative system. And we can see it through the recruitment and selection of officials. The king is requested and advised to appoint trusted people, those who share king's virtues and vices, and those who are gifted with the qualities of birth, wisdom, purity, heroism, and loyalty. The next important aspect of good governance is efficient administrative system. Arthashastra is replete with examples of how the king can have an efficient administrative mechanism. And the first important aspect of efficiency was an efficient officials, civil servants and ministers. For that, the Arthashastra prescribes 4 tests. These tests are tests of virtue, wealth, pleasure and fear. Those who pass the test of virtue would be provided to serve the judicial system. Those who pass the wealth test would be asked to govern the revenue department as well as financial administration. Those who pass the pleasure test would be in charge of guarding the royal ladies. Those who pass the fear test would be the bodyguards of the king. Those who pass all the 4 tests would be appointed as ministers. This is exceptionally brilliantly manifested in the Arthashastra. Thus, the procedure of appointment of the ministers and officials who carry out various administrative procedures is an indicator of the fact that Kautilya had an eye for detail in recruiting the right kind of people in the right position, and this is what good governance demands. Another important aspect of efficient administration was a coordination between the 7 elements of the state or the Saptang, and it is believed that all the 7 elements are complementary to each other, and loss or damage to one would have a cascading implication on the others. The Kautilyan state can be perceived to be a state intervening, regulating, participating in socio-economic activities as well as controlling private enterprises so that fraudulent activities do not happen in the marketplace and in the sphere of business. There was another aspect of efficiency in administration which was relating to salaries and allowances of the government officials, which was fixed and reasonable. The king is said to be the servant of the people and who should also get fixed wage from the state. The allowances of the members of the royal family also was fixed and will not be raised without the approval of the Council of Ministers. In the interest of good governance, it was advised that the king should look after the bodily comforts of his servants, officials, and their emoluments and salaries should be such that it would infuse them with a spirit of enthusiasm to work. Salaries should be just. It should be paid in such a way that these officials, servants working should lead a comfortable life, and if they are comfortable and happy with the salaries, they would never become corrupt. Thus, the king shall not only maintain his servants, but also increase the subsistence and wages in consideration of their learning and their work. So, wages should be subsequently raised based on experience, learning and how much they work. Kautilya even prescribed that the amount of salary of the family of the officials and the king and how much they should receive. Anti-corruption measures was focused by Kautilya. Kautilya believed that corruption can be a menace to good administration. Corruption and misappropriation of public money by government officials is an area of concern, and it is an area of concern in today's world also. Kautilya was quite apprehensive about the honesty of the officials in civil administration, and therefore he suggested severe punishments and penalties to be imposed on the wrongdoers. Aspects of disciplined life and code of conduct are essential features of good governance. The civil servants, like greedy children, need to be watched and guided so that they do not become authoritarian but remain responsive and responsible to the people. The next important aspect of good governance is a positive state for growth and development. Kautilyan idea of a positive state is characterized by the king creating conditions of a good life through an extensive and elaborate list of works: digging wells, canals, constructing dams, roads, preservation of forests, providing infrastructure of trade, commerce, industry, subsistence to the orphans, helpless, aged, women, afflicted, supervising and superintending the various places of pilgrimage, reservoirs, cooperative enterprises, at the same time watching that oppressive taxes are not imposed. These activities are aimed at achieving economic progress, and which is an important area of political stability and power. Kautilya also emphasized on economic growth. He believed that it was the duty of the king to maintain political stability, and in order to maintain political stability, You need wealth and money. In order to achieve the goal of a prosperous, stable state, Kautilya advised the removal of all obstacles to economic growth and also suggested tax incentives to promote economic growth through encouraging capital formation. Interestingly, capital formation is the heart of modern governance discourse championed by international funding agencies like the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. Kautilya also shows a passion for economic growth and development, and good governance can only be possible when there is a full treasury. Emphasis on righteousness, dharma and danda as the basis of good governance. Kautilya believes that for promoting governance, dharma and danda are essential. On the one hand, the leader is expected to devote himself in the interest of the people. On the other hand, danda has to be exercised to ensure that there is fairness in the kingdom. To ensure effective application of dand in harmony with dharma, Kautilya elaborates very careful principles and tests for selection of ministers, officials, for taxation, public expenditure, for maintenance of law and order, and all these students are fundamental canons of good governance. The treatise also spells out in great detail how to control corruption, which can otherwise spread like cancer through the 7 key elements, and we had already studied about the calamities affecting these elements. The idea of constitutional supremacy is very close to the idea of supremacy of dharma and danda. The constitution today is considered to be the supreme law of the land, we all know. All other laws are subservient to the constitution. Similarly, dharma was considered to be the supreme law, and every danda has to be provided in accordance with dharma. We find the Kautilya's Arthashastra focusing on dharma based duties. The duty based narrative ensures that welfare state is not a privilege, but not an entitlement, but it was an essential part of the administrative system. In fact, welfare state and good governance is a prerogative of every citizen, and the sole purpose of the king is to ensure that the citizens are properly served. If you look into the 7 organs of the state, Swami, Amatya, Janpad, Durga, Kosh, Dand, Mitra, all these 7 elements are integrally related to the different conceptualization of good governance. In fact, all the 7 elements are complementary to and work in unison to promote the good governance ideals of participation, accountability, transparency, responsiveness, efficiency, effectiveness, rule of law, equity. In fact, Saptang, if it properly operates, it leads to the basis of good governance. Now, let us see the modern good governance principles and its applications as projected in the Arthashastra. The first principle was participation. We find the concept of participation through decentralization, village council, the Gramik as the head of the village. Citizens had the right to provide their opinion. Transparency could be seen in the fact that king had to take the advice of the public. The king had to dispense all his decisions to the public, and in order to see that everything worked according to dharma. Responsiveness means the administrative system would fulfill the needs of the people. Rule of law connoted the principles of dharma and danda. Equity can be found in social justice, welfare state, taking care of the old, aged, disabled, etc. Consensus orientation can be seen in the decisions taken by the Council of Ministers after much deliberation. Accountability can be seen in the fact that the king was the constitutional slave and he was answerable to the people for his actions. Efficiency and effectiveness can be seen in the different tests to recruit the civil servants as well as the anti-corruption measures emphasized by Kautilya. Finally, the strategic vision can be ensured through the Swami, the most important element in the Saptang. Kautilya's good governance emphasized on 3 basic elements. First, provision of national security and public administration, which would facilitate an able administrative mechanism. Formulation of efficient policies and their effective implementation. Removal of all obstructions to economic growth and tax incentives to encourage capital formation. Ensuring a fair, clean and caring administrative system. Now, based on this discussion, let us try to find out what was good governance and how it was applied in the Arthashastra. The quintessential aspect of good governance, as emphasized in the Arthashastra, is citizens' welfare, happiness of the citizens. Good governance was based on dharma and danda. It was a moral endeavor. Primary duty of the king was happiness of the subjects, a citizen-friendly administrative system. Able governance would lead to the creation of a prosperous state where people can pursue their goals and lead a happy, satisfied life. Involvement of the people in the administrative system entailed participation. Let's quickly sum up what we have studied today. We studied the concept of good governance and the various essentials of good governance. We also studied how the Arthashastra can be considered to be a compendium of good governance by focusing on welfare state, citizen-friendly administrative system, anti-corruption measures, measures for economic growth, capital formation, dharma, danda. We also found that ancient Indian political thought definitely stressed on good governance. Governance in ancient India, as stressed in the Kautilyan Arthashastra, was based on morality and ethics. Thank you.